My name is Don Jackson. I have a bit of a cold, as you can probably tell from my voice, but I'm very glad you're here, and I'm very glad to be here. I'm the director of the Center for Civic Literacy, and we, with the Amon Carter Foundation, are the sponsors of this evening. The Center for Civic Literacy was founded in January of 2006, when actually on January 28, 2006, the mayor and city council of Fort Worth declared that day Civic Literacy Day in Fort Worth. And that was the day also when we held our first conference, which was called TCU and Fort Worth, an Agenda for Collaboration. We have as our mission, as you can see on the banner behind me, our mission is to educate individuals to be informed, responsible, and ethical participants in the civic life of their communities. So tonight is another important opportunity for public education this evening about the persistent problem of children being recruited to serve as child soldiers. Our program is made possible by the Amon G. Carter Foundation. The Amon G. Carter Foundation is one of our city's most important legacies. And tonight, a leader and spokesperson for the foundation will introduce our speaker. Sheila Johnson has her own personal legacy in 2 grown daughters and 2 grandchildren. Her personal legacy is especially important because she is also a longtime state and national advocate for disadvantaged and at-risk children. Sheila is a director of the Amon G. Carter Foundation. We are glad that she is here to introduce our guest, Ishmael Beah.
Thank you very much to Karen and Don, who have worked very hard on behalf of this event this evening. Thank you very much for everything that you've done to make this work. Our guest is an extraordinary young man and human being. He also has a big heart, the most generous spirit, and a wonderful sense of humor. Please join me in welcoming Ishmael Beah.
Thank you. Okay, everyone can hear me very well? Yes? All right, good. Well, first of all, I want to thank Sheila. I want to thank the university, the foundation, and all the departments that are responsible for bringing me here, and everyone who has worked tirelessly to make this happen. And to all of you also for taking the time to be here. I know it's a warm day, so you could be outside doing all the things with your time. So I'm very grateful for deciding to spend this time with me here. I'm going to sort of speak a little bit about my where I'm coming from, my background, my history, and why I decided to write this book, and then leave ample time so that we'll be able to sort of have a conversation as opposed to me just talking at you the entire time. Just for some people who don't know my background, I would just give a short timeline about where I'm from. I'm from Sierra Leone in West Africa, which is where I was born, where I grew up, spent most of my early years as a child and then as a young man as well, as a young boy, I should say. And I was born there in 1980. And I had a very sort of idyllic life. I lived a very simple life. I grew up in the country in a very small town. And I didn't have the luxuries of electricity or tap water, but my life was very remarkable, simple. There was a strong sense of community. I went to school, I learned Shakespeare. I was introduced to American hip-hop. This is when it used to be quite good. Not so much these days. This is when I was drawn to it because at this time you would have words such as clandestine and soliloquy being used in hip-hop lyrics. You will no longer have such usage of these words, the current lyrics that we have. But anyway, this was my life. You know, I had a very strong family and things of that sort, and I enjoyed it tremendously. But all of that changed when the war started in Sierra Leone in 1991, and particularly when it reached my part of the country in 1993. I was 12. And everything that I knew as a child changed significantly, how people related to each other. One of the things that was very devastating to see was how the relationship between particularly adults and children collapsed. Because one of the strange things that started happening in Sierra Leone, which is a phenomenon that is happening now all over the world, is children were forced to fight as soldiers in this war, particularly in Sierra Leone and in other parts of Africa and the world. And the way children were recruited was that one of the methods that was used was that they will force them to kill their own families and sometimes to destroy their own communities. So a place where once a child would not even raise their voice to an adult became a place where a child was now forced to kill an adult. So it changed the dynamics of the relationship, and people began to look at young people in a completely different lens, to the point that a place where once your innocence was celebrated when you came through another town or village now became a place where that innocence was feared deeply because of people who had survived these kinds of experiences. They no longer looked at children as children, but rather they looked at them as something else and feared them deeply. So as a child, when the war came into my life, I'd actually gone to a town that I was born in Matrujong, for a talent show, again, this hip-hop, when the war came into my life. And just, there was no one to explain to us what was happening, and everyone feared us deeply as we tried to go through towns and villages trying to run away from the war. I was with a group of other boys, 7 of us. Whenever people saw us, they ran away from us. Sometimes they attacked us and tried to kill us, just to protect their own towns and villages and so on, and their families and things of that sort. So it became very difficult, the uncertainty of not knowing where to go, what was happening, when would this end, and being separated from family as well. Between the age of 12 and 13, most of the young people I was with, including myself, we lost our families. My entire immediate family was killed in the war. So my mother, father, and 2 brothers were killed in the war. So I became the only survivor of this war. And the only people that were family to me at this time were the young boys that I was running with. So we sort of helped each other out as we navigated this sort of landscape that once we would love walking on a path, going to see my grandmother. Now we fear doing that because there were bodies littered everywhere. If you went to the river to swim, you could no longer do so because it was filled with bodies floating on even blood in the water. So these things were very difficult to the point that even changed my relationship to nature itself. That the way I related to it was now one of deep fear. I remember when I came to live in the United States, and I made some friends when I was in college who lived in California, and I went to visit them. And I remember, I hadn't told a lot of people about my background, and I remember them taking me to hiking. And I was very because whenever I'm in a bush, when I look at a tree, when I'm in a forest, it brings out different memories and emotions within me that is very difficult to explain to people that I'm around. So I was trying hard to really, focus and be there and enjoy the hiking as much as they were. But then night was approaching and they said, oh, we're going to sort of sleep in the bush. And I said to them, you must be joking, right? They said, no, we're going to camp in the bush. And I remember thinking to myself, how could people voluntarily relocate in the bush to sleep there when they have houses in towns with their beds and things like that? But I realized my reaction came from the fact that for me, during the war, my relationship to nature had changed to the point that I went into the bush to stay alive. I slept in the bush to stay alive, because if you slept in a town or a village, the houses would be burned while you're sleeping. You could be burned alive, or you could get killed during an attack. So we went to the bush to stay alive. So our relationship changed from just going there to either farm or to look for fruits or to hunt or things of that sort. Changed completely. Now, when I was in the war, I ran from the war for about a year, and then I was forcefully recruited to fight in this war as a child soldier when I was 13. And I was in it until I was a little over 15, so a little over 2 years I fought. Now, this wasn't a situation of choice where you had no choice but to be a part of it, because if you didn't, you will get killed. And when you became part of these groups, there's a strong sense of coercion, which is that if you didn't do what the commanders wanted, they will kill you. And they made that during the first day of training, when the young people were asked to carry out certain tasks, and they refused or questioned it, they were immediately shot in front of everyone else. So when you were asked to do something, you knew your life depended upon it. But as time went on, with the drugs, the exposure to constant violence, the fighting and things of that sort, what began to happen? These groups began to replace the communities we had lost. The group became our surrogate family. The commanders were no longer people who had forced us, but they became the father figure, the older brother figures, and things of that sort. And when I was writing this book, one of the things I wanted to do was to write it about how I felt as a child during the war, not how I felt about it afterwards. Because I wanted to show how this comes about, how you learn to function with violence, and how you learn to accept these groups. And actually, at some point in my life, I felt that what I was part of was actually the right thing to do. And I completely believed that. I wanted to get that across. So I wanted to write this book about how I felt then. And after I was removed from this war, I've been fighting, in a civil war, just to give you a brief sort of explanation of what the life of a child soldier is. It is one of constant violence. First of all, the way you show your loyalty to the group is through engaging in constant violence. The more violence you committed, the more you were celebrated amongst the group. The more it showed that you wanted to be part of the group. So there was never a time where you were sort of checked or questioned for doing certain things. And young people particularly are drawn into these groups because of their psychological and emotional immaturity. Because of the loss of families, we had nowhere to go. We were able to be manipulated to actually believe that what we were doing was the best thing, that we were avenging the death of our families. But one of the strangest things that I realized after I was removed from the war, that it took quite a lot of time to come to terms with, was that all the other groups had been told the same rhetoric which we had been told, which is that we're fighting the right fight, we're doing it to prevent what had happened to us from happening to other children, and so on and so forth. And when I was removed from the war and I went through rehabilitation and was able to, start regaining myself, I made friends with people who were from the different sides of the war. And we had a conversation, the same rhetoric, and we were their enemy and they were our enemy. That was the only difference. And now I realize something about this. What that perpetrated was that revenge, constant revenge. We went in it and we fought thinking that we were going to find the person responsible for what had happened to us. Through that process, we killed other people who had nothing to do with what had happened to us. But that gave rise for them to be manipulated, to believe that they too can participate and find somebody who is responsible for what had happened to them. So we started creating this cycle of violence that until we were removed from it, until it stopped, everyone was just bent on it with no one having the opportunity to understand each other at all. Because during war, there's a dehumanization that comes, which is that to take another life, you have to dehumanize them, to disbelieve their humanity. But what no one wants to believe is that when you do so, when you dehumanize somebody else, in reverse, you dehumanize yourself. And it requires a lot of undoing, especially if you stay alive afterwards. So when I was removed from this war, one of the difficulties was trying to learn to live with the memories, to function with it. When I was removed from the war was still going on, so the communities hadn't quite come to the point where they had forgiven children. So there was not only believing in yourself, but also having people believe in your humanity again. I spent 8 months at the rehabilitation center just to get a foothold, just to begin to function, to learn how to sleep again, to learn how to trust people. There are still certain tendencies from the war that I'll never be able to get rid of at all. For example, whenever I walk in a room, I'm always thinking, where do I get out if something happens? Even when I'm in the safest place possible, I can't help it. When I'm walking with people, I'm always thinking, memorizing where I'm going, because of the fear that if I get left behind, I know how to get back. Because of the war, I have insomnia problems. I don't sleep very well. I get 3 hours a night, and even that is broken. Each hour I shake awake. And this comes from being in the war, not sleeping, but also after the war, trying to sleep and having a lot of nightmares and being afraid to sleep. Now, I could take all these things in a negative sense, but what I've learned to do, what I tell people is that I cannot forget what happened during the war. I have to learn to live with them and transform them positively for my life. And how I've been able to do that, for example, with the insomnia problem. As a student in college, this was the best thing that could happen to me. Seriously, that's how I learned to look at it, because I was able to do my work ahead of time. I wrote the book while I was in college because I wasn't sleeping anyway. So there are these good things that I learned to look at. Now I could think, oh, this is the worst possible thing that could happen, but it's not. As a writer, I could write other books while my fellow writers are sleeping. So this is how I've learned to sort of look at it positively and transform it. But one of the things that I've learned from this experience, most significant thing, is perhaps the deep appreciation of being alive, of having peace in my life, because I've known what the absence of peace is and what violence does to the human spirit. So for me, that appreciation is what makes me smile all the time. Because for me, waking up in the morning is enough for me to celebrate the entire day, because I know what that is like to not have that, to constantly fear for your life, to not have the luxury to even dream of a future. During the war, our thinking became, can we survive the next minute? And if we did, how are we going to survive the next? We could not think of a future of, I'm going to finish college, or I'm going to do this and that. That thinking was not present. And when the population get to that point where they can't even have the luxury to dream of a long-term future, they can do anything because they've lost faith in their own ability to function as human beings. But one of the things that is not quite spoken about is during the war, I saw again how the human spirit is absolutely remarkably resilient and strong and can go through a lot of difficulties and still survive. During the war, people were able in Sierra Leone to find hope in hopelessness itself, and that's what kept us alive. Hope, I believe, itself is a form of strength, especially during times of complete chaos. During the war, when we found a rotten orange that we ate, we couldn't eat for days, we only drank water, but when we found a rotten orange and we ate it, we said, maybe tomorrow we could find a tree that doesn't have rotten oranges, but maybe fresh ones. That's what kept us alive to the next day. To some people from the outside, it might be a very simple, meager thing, but that was the drive, that perhaps we could find something. So hope and the resilience that's within my culture is what really allows people to continue living. Now, after I was removed from this war, I lived with my uncle in the capital city for a little bit, and I had to learn. I went to school, no one wanted to be friends with me, everyone feared me deeply. I remember times when I started school in the capital, Freetown, Sierra Leone, and sometimes I was in a boys' school and I would put my hand in my pocket just talking to people and everyone would run away because people thought I was reaching for a knife. People still had a difficulty believing in my humanity again, believing that it is actually possible. Even to this day, there's that disbelief. When I'm on certain television shows, they're asking me questions as a way to provoke me because everyone is thinking this guy can't be all that true. He's just a time bomb waiting to explode. Because it's a disbelief that people who come from such experiences cannot survive at all. They cannot live. But that's one of the reasons why I wrote this book, to change that perception. That yes, the path to recovery, it's a difficult process. It's a long-term process. It is not as you've seen in Blood Diamond. You don't shake the child and say you're a good kid and they cry and they're fine. It doesn't work that way. I wish it was that easy, but it isn't. It's a long-term goal. It is difficult, but it is possible. And that's one of the reasons why I wanted to write this book, to show that to people, to show not only how the human spirit can descend into this hell, but also how we can come out of it with the right care and support given to it. That's one of the things that I want to share with people quite a lot. But to also show people what violence is really, what it does to the human spirit. That is not as romantic as Hollywood paints it. When you see war films, there's like a rock and roll song in the background as you're going to war. Or during war, people have the luxury to call their girlfriends or their wives to tell them they love them. During war, the reality is much more harsh than anyone is willing to present. There is no background music. You cannot afford to love yourself during conflict. You're supposed to even love someone or have the luxury to call them. These are realities that are somebody's imagination in Hollywood, who doesn't understand what the reality of war really is. Now, after the war, I lived with my uncle for a little bit. I started school, and then I won a competition to come to the United States in New York. I hadn't left Sierra Leone. I came from the country. Being in the capital city was even overwhelming for me in Sierra Leone. And it was the first time I left Sierra Leone. I came to New York at the United Nations to speak about my experiences. This was a conference put together for children who had survived this same experience in various parts of the world, from Colombia, from Sri Lanka, all over the world. And we got together, everyone, and this is how I actually met my American family, my mother, Laura Sim. She was one of the facilitators of this program. And I remember coming to New York in 1996, it was winter. I come from a place I was saying to Sheila earlier, I love the weather here because it reminds me quite a lot of back home, like the hot weather. But I remember coming in '96 and it was absolutely cold. I have never been anywhere that cold in my life. And no one told me where I was going. And, you know, I'd heard the word snow in Shakespeare because I learned a lot of Shakespeare as a kid growing up, but I didn't really have a sort of experience with it, a tactile experience with what snow is and what it feels like. So I remember when we were landing at JFK, there were all these things falling out of the sky, and then we sort of, you know, we got off the plane and we tried to exit, and we ran back. I came with another kid. We were wearing T-shirts. No one told us where we were going. First of all, I was so cold on the plane, and then when we got out, it was absolutely cold that we ran back in, and so they had to basically talk to us to come back and get in the taxi. And I remember thinking to myself, seeing the snow falling, thinking to myself, the only relationship I had an understanding of this snow was that I'd seen certain Christmas films with snow. So I thought maybe it's Christmas here all the time, you know. Maybe that's what it is, you know. But I remember it was so cold, and then I went to a hotel in Midtown Manhattan. It was the first time I'd had a room that was my own, you know, and there was television and everything. And being in the room, you know, I grew up not having this. Even when I lived in the capital city, I didn't have electricity or things like that. And the heater was on, and no one told me what to do. So first of all, I'm really cold, and then I'm absolutely hot inside. I'm sweating all night long. I'm taking my clothes off. And I remember having this distinct feeling, thinking that this is the most uncomfortable country in the world. You are so cold outside, and you are so hot inside. There's no middle ground, you know. What can, you know? But I had no idea that, you know, I didn't grow up with those realities. But again, that is not to say that I was coming from a primitive place. It's just that the resources that were available to me weren't what people had imagined, and things of that sort. Now, after that conference, I went back to Sierra Leone, but I became friends with with my mother now, Laura Sims. And when I lived in the capital city, which was one of the last safest places until mid-1997, when the government that was in power at that time, the civilian government, was overthrown by a combination of the rebels and the soldiers had come together to overthrow the government. And at that time, not my mother yet, my friend Laura Sims, who was here, decided that she was going to help me to get out of the country so that I wouldn't be dragged into the war a second time around, because my friends were showing up in the capital city. And a lot of my friends that I left behind actually ended up being dragged into the war a second time around. I've been back and been able to see them. Some didn't survive it at all. So I was able to leave, luckily enough, to get out of the country. And eventually in 1998, came to live in the United States and started living in the United States. I remember, though, how this relationship between myself and my mom started was that after the first initial attack on the Capitol, the phone lines were off and nothing, you could not get through to anyone outside of the country. And she was worried about me, and the only way I could reach her was through Red Cross, to send her a note through Red Cross. And when I went to Red Cross to tell them that I have a friend in the United States, in New York, that I want her to know that I'm okay, they said, we can only send notes to family members. And I said, okay, she's my mom. And so I wrote, Ishmael Beah, son, mother, Laura Sims. And I remember thinking to myself, this woman is really going to freak out when she gets this note, because all of a sudden this kid, she's just met, who's been in touch with her, is beginning to claim her, as his mother. And my mom tells me the story now. She got a call from the Red Cross, and they said, we have a message from your son. And she wanted to say that I don't have a son, but she realized that. She said, which one? Because she had met a lot of us during that time. And they said, oh, Ishmael, he just wants to know that he's alive. And so this is how this relationship started with this woman who basically provided me this home. But when I came to live in the U.S. in 1998, this is how the writing of this book began to surface in my head because of this. I realized that at that time, early 1998, much wasn't heard about in the United States about what had been unfolding in Sierra Leone at all. So when I would say to certain people that I was from Sierra Leone, some people didn't even know where that was or whether it was a country. Sometimes I had to describe Sierra Leone via way of Liberia, which has more closer historical ties with the United States. So I felt very frustrated that if people don't know that this country exists, how can they possibly have any kind of sympathy or understanding for the civilian population that has been suffering at that time for over 7 years? And later on, when Sierra Leone started appearing in the news, in the New York Times, on CNN, the way this country was presented, there was so much bent on sensationalizing the violence to the point that it seemed we had always been a country at war, that we were just another African country that could be explained just as how you understand any other African country. That it was just a senseless violence, that we had always been at war, there had never been peace. And there was no human context given to how this was presented as well. So I began to worry, because for people whose first introduction to Sierra Leone came through this medium, their perception of Sierra Leone became Sierra Leone equals civil war, amputation, madness, and nothing more. And I was very worried this is the wrong perception, because Sierra Leone's history during the war is not the entirety of its history. That's not how you understand it. There was a Sierra Leone before the war. There was a Sierra Leone during the war, and a possibility of Sierra Leone after the war. I wanted people to see all those three things. And so I began speaking about Sierra Leone just to tell people that, yes, there was a war there, but there are also remarkable people living there. I grew up there. I went to school there. You know, I had a remarkable time. I had one of the best times in my life there as a kid growing up. I wanted to give that context, because when you give that human context, it allows people to see that people who live in these places have the same human desire, tendencies, needs, and wants as anyone else anywhere. That human connection is often not present when the media tries to present it, because through the media, it's not newsworthy to have a story that has a human context, that shows a way for you to see the people, even in the times of distress, to see their humanity. So I wanted to change that, and I decided to write this book when I went to college, because I was getting frustrated. Each time I spoke on a panel, and everywhere, when I would have 20 minutes, I didn't have enough time to really explain to people how this came about, how this culture that functioned once disintegrated because of this violence that came about. People didn't see that at all. It was just another country that had always been at war. And also, I wanted to change people's perception about this idea of child soldiers. At this point, even the people who worked in the NGOs, non-governmental organizations, still doubted that children who were coming from this war could really recover. And I had been one who had survived, and I know a lot of other friends who had survived, who are doing well with their lives. Just because you've had this experience doesn't mean that it's going to be a burden on your life for the rest of your life. You can't function ever again. I wanted to show people that it is possible to come out of it. So that was also the drive. When I went to college is when I began to sort of think about writing this book. And it all started during my first year of college. I did 2 years of high school and then went to university. I didn't have any school papers when I came to the US, so they basically tested me and decided I was fit for 11th grade. And then I did that. So I wasn't very sure with my writing for college. So I took rhetoric and composition, which is English 0.5, if you will, for basically people who don't think they know what they're doing in college at all. And I was one of those people who was quite confused. But through that class, one of the first assignments that was given was to write about how you played as a child. And I thought, well, that would be quite interesting for me to write about this. But I decided not to write about that sort of deadly play during the war, but rather to write about pre-war Sierra Leone, a place where, you know, I sat around the fire with my grandmother and my grandfather and listened to stories of how we went into the bush to get bamboo and make cars out of it and get wires and try to make this sort of the creative ways of creating our own place space. Where I grew up, it's unheard of for for parents to buy their children toys. You would not even dare to ask your father or mother to buy you toys to play with. So we had to come up with this way of creating things for ourselves. So when I wrote about it, and people were very interested in this land, they wanted to know what was there. And I sort of got an inkling to write a book, but I didn't take it seriously until really during my junior year of college. So I basically wrote a draft of this book during my last 2 years of college and then worked on it afterwards. And so these are some of the reasons why I decided to write this story, really to sort of change people's perception about how they looked at not all Africa as a savanna with lions and giraffes running around. The landscapes are very different. Africa is not a country, it's a continent with different people, different countries. And to me, people always say to me, so what would you hope to achieve from writing this book? And I say to them, if anyone reads this book and know now that Sierra Leone is a country, that people who live there are as human as anyone else anywhere, I have made a difference in my opinion, because I've been able to change people's perception of this place. And as I've been speaking about this book, I realize also people don't know very much about contemporary Africa. Perhaps the last time people read anything about Africa is probably Chinua Achebe's Things Fall Apart, which is a very good book, but that time period doesn't exist any longer in Africa as a continent. If you read Chinua Achebe's Antis of the Savannah, which is 1960 in Nigeria, it's a very different time period. And maybe the last thing people saw was their National Geographic episode of a charred landscape with an African with no shirt on, walking on this burned trees and things of that sort. Now, I've actually never met those kinds of Africans. I'm not sure where they found them for these kinds of shows. But this is the kind of perception that people have of this place, this sort of primitive place, not to know that when I grew up there, I knew about what was going on in America. I learned American history when I was in school. I knew about popular culture. You know, I was into hip-hop that was here in America. I knew about other places in the world. In Sierra Leone, it was actually the opposite that it is in the U.S. It was cool to be smart, to know about other things. As opposed to when I came to high school here, it was uncool to be smart, to be the guys who like school. So when I came here and I would talk to friends in school about, say about, either a rap group or about politics or something like that, people will always turn to me and say, how do you know that you are from Africa? And I always said to them, my response was like, well, Africa is on this planet. It's not really somewhere else, We're much closer. We're much closer than people want to believe we are. Let me tell you an interesting story. I went to Sierra Leone. Last time I was there, I try to go as often as I can. Last time I was there was in 2006, and I went with some American rappers. A friend of mine was making a documentary, and I went along to sort of translate for them and to sort of show them around the country. So we had, some people might not know, we had Raekwon from the Wu-Tang, we had Paul Wall, I think he's from Houston, yes? He makes the grills and he put them in the mouth and things like that, yeah. And we had, and we had other guys. And we went there, and there was a kid who was on the street. And we had, American phones don't work abroad, they're locked. But there's a kid on the street who doesn't have a phone, but knows how to unlock the phones. And one of the things that he said to me was that, hey, Sam, which is more like, an endearment, hey, man, let me see your phone. Can I unlock it for you? And I said, sure. He unlocked it, and he said, well, now that you know I can unlock your phone, I can unlock it for all your friends at this price. And I'm standing there thinking to myself, I'm not even going to negotiate with this kid, because this kid has technology and business skills. But he doesn't have the resources to channel that sort of intelligence for a long-term future. He can only use it to survive each day on the street. But people don't see these kinds of things. That is not newsworthy to write about. He lives in Sierra Leone, but he knows how to work iPhones and all these kinds of things, and work, at that time, iPhones weren't out yet. What was it out? It's the Razor or thing like that. That's the one that was out. He knew how to sort of work these kinds of things, and people would not see that. People would think that people who live in this part of the world are so removed. Even when I went with these rappers and I said to them, people know your music in Sierra Leone, they said, no, man, it's all right. We got off the plane, the first kid we saw was wearing a Wu-Tang shirt that says Cream. And we went to a club and they tried to sing Paul Wall and all these guys tried to sing their music, and everyone is singing the lyrics with them. And so they're shocked because they're like, how is that possible? They're all the way here. And we even remember when we were there, somebody said, Raekwon said, I really want some cognac, some Hennessy. I want, you sure, Ishmael, you think they'll have that? And I said, yes, we do have those things in Sierra Leone. Even though we're coming from, even during the war, we had those things in Sierra Leone still. And somebody gave him a whole bottle and said, you can have it, And so people have this sort of remote understanding of these places. So for me, what I've tried to express to people through this book also is that there's a need for people to, not just about Africa as a continent, but for the rest of the world, for people to expose themselves to the world more, to learn about places even before there's a conflict there. Because when you do so, you learn about other people's cultures. It enriches you, how you understand yourself, how you function with them, those people that you feel will be different from you, but you actually realize that we have more in common. We want the same things for our children, for our families. Our differences are very little, but that's what's amplified most of the time because we don't know much. So we could easily believe that. So my appeal to young and old, college students, non-college students, professors, is to learn to expose yourself to the world more. Learn about places, about cultures before there's a war. Learn to see people's humanity, even at times of chaos. That is, I believe, one of the ways we can change perhaps where the world is going now. Now, one of the things that I'm going to do as a way of extending my gratitude for being invited here is to read a few short excerpts from this book. And the first excerpt that I will read is very short. It basically would explain how this landscape began to change very tremendously after the war reached me and my older brother Junior and a friend Taloi. And so here we go. Junior, Taloi, and I jumped into a canoe and sadly waved to our friends as the canoe pulled away from the shores of Matrujong. As we landed on the other side of the river, more and more people were arriving in haste. We started walking, and a woman carrying her flip-flops on her head spoke without looking at us. Too much blood has been spilled where you're going. Even the good spirits have fled from that place. She walked past us. In the bushes along the river, the strange voices of women cried out, "Gwo Bomumao, God help us," and screamed the names of their children, Yusufu, Jabu, Fode. We saw children walking by themselves, shirtless in their underwear, following the crowd. Nyanjeo, Nyakekeo, my mother, my father, the children were crying. There were also dogs running in between the crowds of people who were still running, even though far away from harm. The dogs sniffed the air, looking for their owners. My veins tightened. We had walked 6 miles and were now at Kabati, grandmother's village. It was deserted. All that was left were footprints in the sand leading toward the dense forest that spread out beyond the village. As evening approached, people started arriving from the mining areas. Their whispers, the cries of little children seeking lost parents and tired of walking, and the wails of hungry babies replaced the evening songs of crickets and birds. We sat on grandmother's veranda, waiting and listening. "Do you think it's a good idea to go back to Mogbemo?" Junior asked. But before either of us had a chance to answer, a Volkswagen roared in the distance, and all the people walking on the road ran into the nearby bushes. We ran too, but didn't go that far. My heart pounded, and my breathing intensified. The vehicle stopped in front of my grandmother's house, and from where we lay, we could see that whoever was inside the car was not armed. As we and others emerged from the bushes, we saw a man run from the driver's seat to the sidewalk where he vomited blood. His arm was bleeding. When he stopped vomiting, he began to cry. It was the first time I had seen a grown man cry like a child, and I felt a sting in my heart. A woman put her arms around the man and begged him to stand up. He got to his feet and walked toward the van. When he opened the door opposite the driver's, a woman who was leaning against it fell to the ground. Blood was coming out of her ears. People covered the eyes of their children. In the back of the van were 3 more dead bodies, 2 girls and a boy, and their blood was all over the seats and ceiling of the van. I wanted to move away from what I was seeing, but couldn't. My feet went numb, and my entire body froze. Later, we learned that the man had tried to escape with his family, and the rebels had shot at his vehicle, killing all his family. The only thing that consoled him for a few seconds at least was when the woman who had embraced him and now cried with him told him that at least he would have the chance to bury them. He would always know where they were laid to rest, she said. She seemed to know a little more about war than the rest of us. The wind had stopped moving, and daylight seemed to be quickly giving into night. As sunset neared, more people passed through the village. One man carried his dead son. He thought the boy was still alive. The father was covered with his son's blood, and as he ran, he kept saying, "I will get you to the hospital, my boy, and everything will be fine." Perhaps it was necessary that he cling to false hopes, since they kept him running away from harm. The last casualty that we saw that evening was a woman who carried a baby on her back. Blood was running down her dress and dripping behind her, making a trail. Her child had been shot dead as she ran for her life. Luckily for her, the bullet didn't go through the baby's body. When she stopped at where we stood, she sat on the ground and removed her child. It was a girl, and her eyes were still open, with an interrupted, innocent smile on her face. The bullets could be seen sticking out just a little bit in the baby's body, and she was swelling. The mother clung to her child and rocked her. She was in too much pain and shock to shed tears. Now, I wanted to read that just to sort of bring you to this landscape, to give you this sort of visual cue to see how things were beginning to change tremendously, how people were learning to function with the violence. I mentioned earlier that sometimes these places are spoken about and sensationalized, and when that happens, it brings about a sense of hopelessness, that these things, nothing can be done about it, that these places are hopeless. It is not true. If Sierra Leone was hopeless, I wouldn't be standing in front of you. People won't be living there right now. I love going there. Actually, when I go there, I'm able to sleep there deeper than I can sleep in the United States. So it's not a hopeless place. It has cures for sleeping, insomnias like me particularly. But one of the things that I'm going to say now before I close this talk and open it up to questions and answers is to speak about, before all of this, just briefly give you an idea of one of the things that I love about Sierra Leone. Many things, the weather, the food, no offense to American cuisine, whatever that might be. But growing up there, one of the things that was in my life that I believe has a strong impact on my ability to continue to live with this is my early childhood. That strength, that early foundation of community, of caring about others that I had is what allows me and gives me the strength to continue living. It's not only coming to the United States that did that. That's part of the reason why I didn't end this book in the US. I didn't want anyone to mistake that at all. And second, this book, the way I'm able to write this book, my early sense of narrative comes from being exposed to so much oral tradition as a child growing up, where in the evening, as I mentioned earlier, we sit around the fire and the older people would tell stories to the young. And the stories were the way they transmitted knowledge of the community, histories of the communities of particular families, moral and ethical standards of the community, how you behaved, were all embedded in the storytelling, and I was presented to you. And so as a kid, one of the amazing things about oral tradition storytelling is that it facilitates active listening. Because you're not taking notes, you have to learn to remember. It's a memory exercise. And how they tested this was that when they told a story, at another gathering 2, 3, 4 days later, the older person would randomly select one of the kids to retell a story that had been told. Now, if you didn't listen, you could not tell the story. And if you grew up in a small town where your neighbors or family, they will feed you and they will also beat you up if you did something wrong, you didn't want to be known as the child who doesn't listen. It was bad news for you. So you listened carefully, and then when you were called upon, you retold the story, and everyone paid attention. When you added or removed anything from the story, you were immediately smacked in front of everyone else. And this was not like a mean sort of, taking you out or anything, but they said, no, start over again, because they will say to you, when you destroy the backbone of a story, you destroy the purpose and functionality of the story. Each story is told with a purpose and a function, and you cannot take or remove anything from it. There are a few stories that had that exception, but the majority that transmitted this knowledge didn't have that exception at all. And I realized that when I was writing this book, that my early sense of narrative comes from that, because when you tell people a story orally, you have to bring them to the landscape so that they can see, hear, smell, and be a part of the experience more intimately, to visualize it. And another thing that I realized writing this story was that as a child growing up, Sierra Leone being a former British colony, we came to be fascinated with the English language and think that it was the best you could know, to the point that parents even forced their children to learn to speak English more than any other language. Sierra Leone has a lot of languages. And as a kid growing up, all of them were considered vernacular in school. If you spoke your language in school, you were given 6 lashes or sometimes fined or punished. So we grew up thinking that our languages were not important as much. But when I was writing this book and I tried to translate conversations that were had in Mende, Creole, Timini, or any of the languages in Sierra Leone, I began to realize how remarkably beautiful the language is, and also how there are no English equivalent for certain things in my language. That the struggle to find that English equivalent is what makes this book what it is, what brings it alive in people's minds. For example, I'll share 2 things with you. In Mende, if you translate directly when you're telling a story, when you say night came suddenly, if you translate directly into English, the equivalent is the sky rolled over and changed its size. That's how you say night came suddenly. So when I would say that, all of a sudden everyone says, wow, that's beautiful. I don't like to take credit for it because it's already in the language, you know. But that's the beauty of the language, of the people that was there, you know. And another thing that I'll share with you is that in Sierra Leone, the part of the country that I come from, if people say to you, my dog, people speak in parables so that you can find meaning in the words they say. If somebody says to you, my dog sleeps in the cooking area, to the outsider, they might think we need to put doors on the kitchen or we need to feed the dogs or do something. That's not what that means. What it means is that the family is hungry because there are 3 cooking stones and you use firewood. If you cook every day, the fireplace is always warm. The dog would not lay there. But if you don't cook for 2, 3, 4 days, it's cold enough that the dog can actually lay there. That's what that means. So when I was writing, I began to experience the beauty of this culture, its people, the language, and I wanted to get that across as well, for people to see how this was disrupted, not only the disruption, but how it was disrupted and the possibility of returning to this kind of life. These are the things that I miss about Sierra Leone. Also the human contact is what I miss about Sierra Leone. I live in New York where there's not much human contact between people at all. There's a deep fear. You don't even know your neighbors. They don't know you. In Sierra Leone, it's unacceptable not to say hello to your neighbors in the morning. Everyone will talk about it. This guy doesn't like to talk to neighbors, and he's like this or that. When I first came here, to this day, one of the things that I'm always shocked about, whenever I fly into New York, I always try to get people to jump in a taxi with me. I'm still not used to the idea that one person can hail a taxi and they'll sit in it and it will take them where they want to go, and everyone is trying to get another taxi. Back home, there is no such thing. In a taxi, there will be 4 people in the back, and in the driver's seat, there will be the driver and 2 people. So a complete stranger will sit next to you and say, so how are you? How is your family? And you get to know them. So that human contact, I miss that quite a lot. And the simplicity of how just people live their life. These are the things that are not spoken about because these things are not newsworthy. In Sierra Leone, there are people are still recovering from the war. Not everyone has forgiven everyone, but there are a tremendous compassion that is there, where some people have been able to adopt children who actually massacred their entire families. People don't have that capacity in most parts around the world. But this is not newsworthy. When you speak about it, people will say that doesn't give the kick that people want. You know, that's not what people are used to knowing about these places. So with that said, I'm going to read a quick thing that I'm going to live with you. I love living on things on a lighter note. And this comes from my grandmother's village, and it's a saying that an old man used to say all the time to people, and I hope that you can keep this with you. There was a thick forest on one side of the village where my grandmother lived and coffee farms on the other. A river flowed from the forest to the edge of the village, passing through palm kernels into a swamp. Above the swamp, banana farms stretched into the horizon. In the morning, the sun would rise from behind the forest. First, its rays penetrated through the leaves, and gradually, with cockcrows and sparrows that vigorously proclaimed daylight, the golden sun sat at the top of the forest. The evening ended with the cracking of branches in the forest and the pounding of rice in mortars. The echoes resonated in the village, causing birds to fly off and return curiously chattering. Crickets, frogs, toads, and owls followed them, all calling for night while leaving their hiding places. Smoke rose from thatched roof kitchens, and people would start arriving from farms carrying lamps and sometimes lit firewood. We must strive to be like the moon. An old man in Kabati repeated this sentence often to people who walked past his house on their way to the river to fetch water, to hunt, to tap palm wine into their farms. I remember asking my grandmother what the old man meant. She explained that the adage served to remind people to always be on their best behavior and to be good to others. She said that people complain when there's too much sun and it gets unbearably hot, and also when it rains too much or when it is cold. But she said no one grumbles when the moon shines. Everyone becomes happy and appreciates the moon in their own special way. Children watch their shadows and play in its light. People gather at the square to tell stories and dance through the night. A lot of happy things happen when the moon shines. These are some of the reasons why we should want to be like the moon. I thank you, and now I will entertain questions from you. There's only one question. I must have done a good job. No? Just kidding.
I just want to say your story is incredibly powerful, and thank you very much for coming here. Tell us. I just was very moved by your depiction of the dehumanization of both the enemy and yourself during the war. I was very curious, especially like the development of camaraderie amongst your group, and probably the initial deaths of many friends. Did that separate your ability to be able to relate to people over a period of time, especially during that time? And was it very hard to transition to getting to relate to people later on during your rehabilitation?
To repeat for other people to hear is that how did my relationship in the war with people affect how I was able to relate to people after the war and during the war as well? How were those relationships? Well, during the war, one of the things that as a child that we began to lose quickly, running from the war and then starting to fight in it, is we lost the ability to exhibit certain human emotions, like feeling sorry, feeling remorse, because you can't afford to have it in the war. So we cared about friends that were in the war with us, were our friends. We loved them dearly and we tried to protect each other. But when somebody was killed, we left them there and tried to forget about them immediately. You cannot mourn somebody at that time. We couldn't. And even when we were running from the war, one of my friends died along the way. At this time we were 12 and we had to bury him. We had to continue walking. We could not stay there. We could not try to mourn him because that would cost us our lives. So you have that kind of relationship. But also, after coming from the war, one of the difficult things that I had to learn to do is to trust people again, to rely on people, to believe that people can actually befriend each other purely just to help them. I had come to believe, based on my experience, that human beings only befriended each other to actually use them and do something bad to them in the end, because that's my childhood experience. So I had a very difficult time trusting or relying on people. And when I was at rehabilitation, that's what I began to gain that relationship with the people who worked at the center slowly and began to gain that. And even when I came to live here, it took a lot of years before I could really trust people and really believe that I could rely on people and I could fully trust them. And sometimes I didn't even share my story with a lot of people because I just didn't think it was appropriate and that I wanted them to know, not out of shame, but I didn't think they could understand. So that's one of the things that you lose, trust in humanity in general. And it requires a lot of time. And one of the things that you develop as a child coming from any kind of trauma, not just war, is that you develop an instinct to know when people are genuine or not, when they're helping you. You have a very strong instinct. So I also had that. But nowadays, I also realize that by me not trusting people, by me always thinking that somebody is up to something, actually made it very difficult for me to recover. That I needed to rely on people, to trust people. And that made it easier for my recovery process also. Because I encountered people who selflessly cared for me at the rehabilitation center, my family here. So that began to change completely. So nowadays, when I meet people, I'm not naive, it's not what I'm saying to everyone. When I meet people, I come with a clean slate. And based on what you do, I begin to darken it. So, because for me, I want to meet people I don't want to have any preconceived ideas of people because people have had that about me most of my life, So I don't want that, yes. Yes, sir.
First of all, thank you very much for your time. My brother and his wife have adopted a little boy from Sierra Leone, and
That's
I've
good.
been able to get him back over due to the U.S. He hasn't been able to receive a visa. It's been about a 3.5, 4-year process, and we're going to have the opportunity to go to Sierra Leone this summer and visit for a couple weeks.
Howdy, buddy.
What's that?
Howdy, buddy. Okay, sir. All right. See, all right, that's good.
Into the African, I get all info from him, but anyway, I really do ask with great humility, like how we can contribute. I think as Americans, obviously, a lot of times we get stereotyped as we want to go help, and we think we're going to go and help. We're going to spend maybe an insignificant amount of 10 days in Sierra Leone. I really did want to. How can we best gain that union? I want to make the most of that time. And we're going to be traveling to McKinney, Freetown, obviously, and working with some orphanages, things like that. But I think we always think that we're going to go help or save in this very short amount of time. And from listening to you, I feel like we're going to be the ones to receive, obviously. But if you had any words of wisdom and advice, just how to make the most of that time, we'd really appreciate it.
Well, first of all, what I would say is that to make the most of that time that you're going to be spending in Sierra Leone, first of all, I want to thank you very much for trying to sort of take this young person into your life. I think it's absolutely remarkable. One of the things that I always say to people is that no one should ever belittle their contribution to making a change. I think oftentimes we're so overwhelmed by what's going on in the world that everyone feels that there's nothing that I can do or my help is absolutely not going to do anything. But imagine if everyone felt that way. The alternative will be worse, which is that I won't be standing in front of you even. Because there are a few people like my family who decided there's something we could do. We could take this kid in our lives. And that changed my life to a large extent. So each person's contribution is absolutely important. Do not belittle your contribution, whatever it might be, and try to find it. My suggestion to you is that when you go, first of all, leave all your preconceived ideas of what this place might be out the door and go in open and try to look closely, learn. The reason why I'm saying is that oftentimes people go to help without actually taking time to learn and see what is it that people really need, as opposed to what we think they might want. This is a big difference with people that can do sustainable work and people that can just patch things. I'll give you some example. This whole idea of one computer per child is going on now, I think it's a ridiculous idea for a place like Africa, particularly as a continent. And the reason why I tell you, when you go, you see it, community life is much more important in these places. That if you give each child a computer, you're basically saying that you don't need anyone anymore. You can go online and look up whatever you want. There's no community any longer. The traditions begin to disintegrate. But if you give a village 3 computers, then everyone has to work to take care of those computers. There's a middle ground, a place to share knowledge. Then they're still able to function as their own tradition without enjoying the modern world, but not lose what they have, their foundation. That's one thing. I was in Cameroon, and there are people trying to put water wells in places. And to them, fascinating idea is that everyone comes in, give tap water, pumps that run with showers in everyone's house. It's a brilliant idea, right? But actually it doesn't help in the north of Cameroon, which is an extreme area where people, women, the only time they are able to break out of the sort of male dominance is when they go to fetch water to the tap. That's when they're able to talk about the men, to do other things, and these kinds of stuff. So if you put tap water in their houses, you take away that freedom from them. But people are not thinking these things. So what I'm saying to you is that when you go, observe, look, ask people, what do you want? Sometimes people probably don't even have electricity to run a computer. So if you give them a computer, they're not going to do anything with it. You know, perhaps they need a school building. They need a desk in a school building. That might be what they need, you know. So it's to ask what people want and observe what people want. But go with openness and learn. Try to understand what people are. When are you going, by the way? June 13th. And you're there. I'll miss you. I won't be there anymore. It would be great if I would be there while you're there. So. But you'll find other remarkable people. There are more of us. I should hope. Yes.
Can you hear
Yes, I can hear you.
me? Ishmael, it's really great to hear from you. It's a great privilege to see the, if I can say so, the living testament of human endurance. And you're an inspiration to a lot of people who survive that kind of conflict. I'm actually the chairperson of a nonprofit seeking to build a school in Freetown near Quebec. You may be familiar with it.
Yes.
Yeah. And one of the things that we were dealing with was in a society that's kind of recovering and reconstructing itself after a decade-long conflict, how well are communities receiving these children who are, I guess, young adults who have participated in that conflict? Because he mentioned that there's kind of a shift, a critical shift in people's attitudes towards those children after they came out of the war. It wasn't so much about innocence, it was about fear of innocence, I guess you would say. So how has that attitude changed? Is it still changing, or is it covering still?
The question is how people receiving children who participated in the war coming from the war, has the attitude changed? Is it still changing? I would say it is still changing. And the reason for this is as follows. We had a truth commission in Sierra Leone, which allowed people to go and tell their stories and people forgive them. But forgiveness has a practical purpose to it, application, which is that we all can say, oh, we forgive each other. But forgiveness also comes with stability in people's lives. So a lot of people have been willing to forgive children who burned their villages, but their lives haven't changed much because of the economy and the political situation that was existed in Sierra Leone before the current regime. That you forgive somebody because they burned your village, and 2-3 years later you still live in the ruins of that burned village, you're going to get upset. It's just human, and you're going to look at this person differently. So that's the kind of thing that we have in Sierra Leone now, where people are poor, desperate, their situation hasn't changed, and they're forgiven, they want to forgive, but they still are reminded because there's nothing to do with their lives. So that's the point where we are now. There are lots of people, though, that are forgiven and that are willing to go on with their life, but there's still a few. Even when I go back, there are people that would not attack you or anything, but the way they look at you, you know that they don't like you at all. And again, I expect them to have that process. I don't expect anyone to just say, I forgive you. It's a process as well. I always say to people, and people get shocked sometimes, yes, we were victimized to do the things we did, but a lot of us did some really horrible things as children in that country. And even though we shouldn't be held responsible for it, it's not something that people can easily just forget, So they have to learn to forget it and to accept us again. And one of the things that had been done in country more, as opposed to the capital city, was traditional ways of accepting children into the communities, ceremonies that have been performed to do that. But strangely enough, a lot of young people are now migrating towards the capital because a lot of the development that's coming into the country, NGOs are setting up in the capital city. So everyone is living the countryside, and the older people are only the people who are left in the ruins of the war. And so they continue to be upset. So that's a big problem as well. We need to shift, not just bring everything into the capital, but go into the country and try to change those places as well. We'll take 2 last questions. You and then the young woman. Yes.
I just wanted to thank you for talking fast, but I have a really simple question. I want to know what your plans are for the future.
What my plans are for the future? I'm as confused as the average young American kid. I always tell people, my life experience has taught me a few things, and I have an understanding of certain things, but I really don't know much about life. I'm still learning as well. So just to put that out there. What I want to do, life is very strange. You have your plans and it has its. If it works together with yours, then you're great. If not, you find yourself in a different place, but you still love it. I studied political science in school, and I want to continue to write. I'll write another book. I want to write another book. I need to stop traveling so I can write another book. And it will be fiction. What I'll write next will be fiction. I know a lot of people are interested in a sequel of this book, something that follows up from where this ended. One of the comments I've had is that it ended abruptly. People wanted more. And the reason why I would not simply write a sequel just now is that if I write a sequel to this book, I'm committing another 2-3 years of speaking about myself. And I think it's unhealthy to do that for 5 years, really. So I would choose another road. But I want to continue to write more, but also I want to go to law school. It was something that I wanted to do before I decided to publish this book, and this book thing came into play. So I still want to go to law school. Now the conflict is my mom doesn't think law school is a good idea because she thinks it would sort of stump my creativity. And I want to sort of decide when I can go to law school and when I can write before going to law school. So that's the dilemma I have. But we'll see. But definitely I will write. What I do is that I don't know yet. So. Hey, Kushaidi, do you sabi Creole? I don't lose you now, eh? Everybody fine. Thank you.
Thank you for coming and speaking to us today and telling us about Sierra Leone and your experience growing up there. I was curious, I know Sierra Leone right now, according to the Human Development Index, is the lowest ranked country according to that index. And I was for the future of Sierra Leone and for growing economically and going into the future?
That is actually one of the discussions that the youth population is having quite a lot in Sierra Leone, because one of the people, there's a lot of young people, orphans in Sierra Leone, and one of the things that's strange is that they can't do anything. They can't afford to go to school, they can't afford to do anything with themselves, and there are no jobs available. A lot of infrastructure was destroyed. So Sierra Leone has definitely hit the bottom. We can't go beyond that. The only question now is that how fast can we develop? And what is the rate, and would that frustrate people? The current government that we have seems to be starting off well. Hopefully they will continue in that way. What I see for Sierra Leone in particular is that the way to really, it's a small country, Sierra Leone. It is not that difficult of a country to really change around and to fix. We have a lot of natural resources. I think we can find ways to really make it so that the population benefits from the revenues that are made out of these natural resources. I think that's one of the things that can actually shift the economy of Sierra Leone. For example, with diamonds, everyone knows the idea of blood diamonds. The way we can do that is to actually create factories in Sierra Leone that polish the diamonds so that value is added to the diamond in Sierra Leone. And that could provide jobs for people, making roads that allow people to access certain parts of the country easily, having electricity, so that companies are willing to go and set up certain things. We have a lot of tourism. I'm not saying this because I'm from Sierra Leone. We have one of the most beautiful beach, you've been there, it's at the beach fronts in the world. We don't know about, Sierra Leoneans we don't go to the beach, only for us to play soccer or for camping or, like on Easter or things like that, To this day, even my cousins ask me, do you know why the NGOs, the white people, do you know why they just lay on the beach all day? So I do, I said, why don't you ask them? I have no idea. But but the idea is that we have a lot of things that if we have smart people that really are willing to bring this country to the point that the resources are used to benefit the populace, we can shift. And that needs to happen very soon. A lot of the youth population needs to go to school or do something with it. Like most people want to go to school. Education needs to be provided. Hospitals needs to be rebuilt and things like that. There's a lot of Sierra Leoneans who want to go back. If jobs are provided, people will go back to assume those positions of teaching or being a doctor. So that's what needs to happen. One of the things that this current government has been doing, which I think none of the other governments have done before, is they've tried to reach to the diaspora community, to ask people that have expertise to go back, which is something that hasn't been done before. So I found that usually they see people in the diaspora as a threat, that they're going to come and they have all these Western ideas and things like that. But lastly, I don't want even people in the diaspora to feel that because they've lived in the West that they know everything. We don't. We need a combination of knowledge on the ground and knowledge from outside to be able to help people, not one to overwhelm the other. Once you overwhelm one with the other, it doesn't work at all. That is what is needed. So even Sierra Leoneans who are going, we say that to them, don't go and think that because you've lived in the West, you know everything. You don't. That's just the plain truth. So those are the things that need to happen, but they need to start happening fairly soon because you don't want the people to get to the point where they're frustrated and willing to do something else. I don't want that at all. So with that said, I'm going to leave you actually with a quote from Ernest Hemingway. And I like this quote because I think it really, for me, it sort of exemplifies what the human spirit is and how some are stronger and sometimes some are not. But generally, I believe all of us have that strength within us. And it says, the world breaks us all, and afterwards, some are stronger in the broken places. Thank you.